Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of Faith Unraveled, where we discuss the chapter of life after an awakening. We're into another episode on the book Recovering Agency by Luna Lindsay Corbden. This week, we're going to be talking about social pressure, which I'll be honest, did not occur to me ever when I was in the church as something that was really defining my experience as a member of the church as much as it does now, looking back on it. Yeah. It is so monumental. This is so big. I think social pressure is probably bigger than the indoctrination itself.
Well, I think it keeps you indoctrinated, the social pressures.
It does. It's this...
Yeah. And we talked about this before as we were like thinking through, like, what do we want to talk today? I think we felt like we were in an elite system.
Yeah.
A system that was, I'm going to say, better than all the other systems around, meaning that this system was the only true system that could get you back to Heavenly Father. And so that became an elite thought process, a system that's better than everybody else. And so those social pressures to keep you in the system becomes more reinforced
constantly.
Yes.
Yeah, it's constantly reinforced.
Yeah.
And by the people around you. And what we know about our species is that we value safety over truth.
Yeah.
And when you talk about social pressure, what you're talking about is the safety within your group. How well you conform to a group is how safe you are. Mm-hmm. And that's what defines your position in the group.
Yeah.
And so much of this is like programmed into our DNA, it seems. It's hard to even recognize it when you're in the program. So we're going to talk today about the missions, the temple, garments, things like modesty, seminary. We're even going to talk about like parental gossip within the religious system and how these all keep this cycle of devotion going. And I think it will be a real eye-opener on really how much of those social pressures played a part in your belief. So if I were to ask you, what area of your experience in the church was most influenced by the social dynamics around you, could you pinpoint one thing above all the others?
It's the mission for me. The mission was the biggest social pressure for me. They'll say it's a choice. You have your agency, you can pick, but there is ramifications if you don't.
So what would those be? What would the social ramifications of not serving a mission be?
So the example is, prior to my mission, when I'm dating, a lot of women will not date pre-missionaries. They're looking for a return missionary. And so what that means is, you realize right away prior to the mission, you're like, oh my goodness, if I didn't go on a mission, I know that some women wouldn't date me if I didn't go on a mission. So that was a huge social pressure.
And now looking back, can you see like my position in this group is based on how well I conform to what the church teaches me to do. And nobody wants to be most people don't want to be an outcast. If you believe that the church is true, you don't want to be an outcast in that system.
Let me reverse this. Would you have dated or married someone that wasn't a return missionary?
Yeah, this is interesting. So you asked me this last night, and I had been dating a non-member when I met you. And I had tried to get him to like take the discussions. And he was not raised in any kind of religion. And so I'm sure it was just bizarre to him. But I remember thinking to myself, okay, well, when he gets baptized, Alicia, you're going to have to be willing to wait for him while he goes on his mission. Because that was like a real part of my belief. Part of my belief is that, in order to set up a proper family structure, you got to have a dude who is willing to make sacrifices for the Lord. And how do I know if you're willing to make sacrifices for the Lord if you weren't even willing to serve a mission?
So that became a very important attribute you were looking for someone to get married, right?
To me, it was. I remember as a youth, as young as 7th grade, I remember making a list in Young Women's of the features that we wanted in a husband. I actually remember doing it as a Young Women's president now too, but I remember it being encouraged that we look for someone who had an education, served a mission, was obedient, kept the commandments. These were the features that we were taught, like, what kind of father do you want for your children?
So it was a valid social pressure then.
Absolutely.
Like because I felt it. I felt like if I didn't go on a mission, I would be very limited on the women that would marry me. Similar to what you were talking about, you're not being a virgin, getting married. You felt like it would limit you for getting married also, right?
Yeah.
The mission for me was that.
Yeah.
And I also felt like if I didn't get on the mission and worked real hard on my mission, it would also limit me for marriage.
And for me, just as you mentioned, I had lost my virginity and had gone through the repentance process, before I got married. And I definitely felt that as soon as people found out that I wasn't a virgin, that I would not be marriable. In fact, I did date one person, and it was kind of the point in our relationship that I needed to say, I lost my virginity, and that's why I moved to California to complete that repentance process so that it didn't happen again. And the way that I started the conversation was, would you ever marry someone that wasn't a virgin? And he was basically like, oh, heck no. And I thought, I'm going to have to figure out what to do with this now. And so he went off to college, and I think I just kind of ghosted him. I think it was a big heartbreak because he didn't ever get a reason for that. So maybe if he's watching, that will close that circle.
A reason for that.
But you don't know what to do. So you are literally like, you have downgraded yourself big time. Like, we talk about what happens to your social circle when you leave the church. But there's also so many things within the church that downgrade you from a social circle. There's people that are looked down upon because they let their kids play sports on Sundays. Yeah. There's people that are looked down upon because they don't make their daughters dress like they're wearing garments when they're 15.
Yeah. We need to get into that topic.
Yeah, we'll talk about modesty for sure. But that's so interesting about the mission. And I'm glad you brought up the part about the purity, the purity side.
It's very comparable. I don't think the guys have that. Like I did have sex prior to getting married. Did I feel like I was a used
tissue?
No, not at all. And did I feel like it was going to infect me getting married? No. Now, the mission, on the opposite hand, I did 100%. I felt like if I didn't return worthy, that it would impact me. But having sex, no.
Did you feel like I was a used piece of gum getting married, or were you more excited that I maybe knew what I was doing a little better?
I was more excited, but like we talked about that wild man. I wanted more of a rebellious type of person because I felt like I didn't fit in the mold of the church, and I needed a partner that would have that same type of mentality. That I know that that mentality would go away once you got married.
You didn't know that my having sex and going through the repentance process would give me the heightened sense of scrupulosity and make me have even more dedication. Yeah. So sometimes that can backfire. Okay.
Social pressures.
So, okay, let's talk about temple garments next.
Let's just talk about the temple in general, not the garments. And then let's go into the temple garments. So if you
haven't gone through the temple, here's the thing. Most people, when they get to the temple, from our generation, it was not discussed at all. Yeah. Wait, did you just get up to go get that?
I did.
Did I buy you a set of garments that you never opened?
Yeah, it was right before the faith deconstructed.
Please tell me they're bottoms. So, it's a top. Top.
I wish they were bottoms.
Do you have any bottoms?
Let's take a look.
Oh, my dear God. Okay. Okay, this is definitely not one of those episodes that people are going to invite their believing spouse to watch. This is capital O offensive. Okay. So while he's looking for that, I will say that for the majority of people that have gone to the temple, in our generation, things were not spoken of beforehand. Oh.
Yeah, I have this one.
Okay.
Sorry.
You don't still have your temple recommend, so you can't order a set.
That's the story where
we should have. Yeah.
This is going to be interesting.
I don't think I have any left.
Yeah, I think you got rid of them all. I kept one.
Okay, for those who are listening on the podcast, Jamie just jumped off mic to go search for a pair of garments that he has, which we're going to show.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is that for most people that went to the temple in our generation, you had a moment of holy shit, what did I get myself into? And I'm going to say the majority of people probably had this moment. There's people standing in a circle chanting. The women have veils over their faces. I mean, it looks like a 10 out of 10 like definition of a cult. And the only way that my brain could reconcile this was to say, every other cult is just aspiring to be God's church. We have the real church. Of course, we're going to have rituals that look like this. We're going back to Solomon's temples. P.S. We weren't. This is what we believed was happening. We didn't know we were doing Masonic rituals. And so you're doing these handshakes. As a woman, you've got your face veiled. At one point, you're asked to bow your head and covenant to obey the law of your husband.
As your husband.
You go in. Yeah, we're going to talk about the naked part beforehand and what happened to you when you came out with your tighty whities on. You were really supposed to be naked. I mean, it was just a whole thing. But here's where the social pressure comes in. You're looking around the room. And who've you got around you?
That's exactly
your bishop, your parents, your grandparents, your aunts and uncles, your Sunday school teacher, your really cool seminary teacher. I mean, you're looking around at
friends who might have gone ahead of you.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And you're just like, okay, this is normal. This is normal. This is normal.
Everybody else has the baker's hat on.
Yes,
Everybody else.
The only thing that I can compare it to is that there was a psychological study where there is one participant in the study that doesn't know that she's in the study. And then there's a whole panel of other people that are in on it. And they show up on a projector a certain symbol. Let's say it's an apple. And they say, everyone stand up when you see this thing again. Well, they show something that's completely not an apple. Let's say it's like a wrench. And so she's waiting for the apple. She's looking at the screen, waiting for the apple to come back on. But everyone around her stands up when they see the wrench. And you can see she's thinking in her head, wasn't it the apple? I know it was the apple. I know that's what I saw. We're supposed to stand when we see the apple. But she's looking around. Every single person in the room is standing with the wrench. And she's just waiting for that apple to pop back up. And eventually, what does she do? Eventually,
she starts following everybody else.
She starts to question herself, right? What degree of self-trust does it take a person to stand when no one else is standing? Yeah. There's one part during the temple that it says, if you don't want to do this, you can leave right now.
You'll probably have people in the comments who are members that will say, you could have left. Why did you stay?
Right.
But the social pressure around that, there's no way you're going to step out of that. And you're feeling like it's really weird. You're almost like feeling, did I just join a cult? Like, this is weird. I'm wearing a green leaflet thing over my genitals. And then I have this baker hat on and this long robe, and I'm flipping that robe around, and I'm like, where did we even learn this in the church? It really bugs you, but you're pulling it back because everybody else is around and they're smiling at you.
What was the part of the temple that was the most kind of disturbing to you?
The naked part was so disturbing to me. You go into what they call initiatory, where they wash and anoint you. And I wasn't comfortable being naked. And as I come out my whitey tighties thinking that I can get through this, they're like, nope, go back. You need to be fully naked. Put your shield on, fully naked.
And you have this like poncho. It's just a big sheet with a hole in the middle. So you put your head in the hole, and then you've got this sheet that's technically over your front and over your back, but the sides are open because they need to be able to reach in to access your body so that they can do the washing and anointing.
And they're touching your body, and they don't touch your penis or anything, but they touch right up here where it's very uncomfortable.
The difference when you were saying well, I'm a wild man, but not like that. Well, that's because that wasn't your choice.
Yeah.
It's inflicted on you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it was just in a very awkward place with a bunch of everybody is waiting for me to come out of the initiatory. You just feel so vulnerable. Yeah. It's definitely a social pressure. Just like the mission, you're not going to most people won't walk out of the mission. I didn't know anybody to walk. Like, to
those who are walking out of the mission, we tip our hats to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is a really difficult thing to do.
But I never saw someone at the very beginning of the temple raise their hand and walk away. What I have seen is people say, that's too weird, I'm not going back.
Right. But they do go through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You do hear a lot of people that say that.
Yeah.
I don't remember what I was thinking during the initiatory, but I do remember that on my way to the temple, so the initiatory is the naked part. I do remember on the way to the temple, my maid of honor said to my stepmom, did anyone tell her about the naked part? My stepmom laughed. Like, everybody there is just like, we're going to try to normalize this as much as we can. But I was like, wait, what? Once I got there, my maid of honor's on one side, and I'm thinking in my head, she's done this.
Yeah.
All these people that I love and trust have done this.
Yeah.
So it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
You know what felt the most sickening for me in the temple? Because none of that stuff really got to me. I wasn't thinking like, oh, they're giving me a new name. I'm bowing my head to obey my husband. Like, at that phase of my life, I was 18 years old. I was like, it was October after my senior year of high school.
Yeah.
Like, that's how young I was. I remember seeing you in your hat. And I was like, I had just been there a couple nights ago to do my endowment. And then we went back to get sealed. And I knew I was wearing my green apron, the robe and the socks, the slip and the slippers. I knew I was wearing all that stuff. But I didn't realize you were going to be wearing your baker's hat. And when I saw you, I kind of got sick to my stomach.
It was kind of culty.
Isn't that sad? Like, on your wedding day, I'm looking at my husband and I just remember thinking, are you doing this? You're doing this. You're going to do that. You're going to marry someone in a baker's hat right now. Go do it. Like, oh God.
Yeah. I can't imagine what you might have been going through during that. Like 18 and 22, walking into it's a beautiful ceiling room. A lot of people have gone through the temple. It's the one that has the things in the very middle, but that's not how you want to get married. Like, you don't want to, I don't know.
I actually have kind of a sick feeling in my stomach, like, even thinking back on it. How terrible is that, to steal that special day away? Well, back to what we talked about last week, right?
Social pressures, right?
Well, the social pressure, but
you
also
we're going to
replace what you would have done with our shit.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I don't remember if they did this to us, but a lot of people are asked not to look at each other over the altar. So you sit down you kneel down at an altar, and then you are to look up at the sealer. So you're kneeling down, you've got the patriarchal grip, and then watch, this is where your head goes. We're both looking up there. And like, we're not supposed to into each other's eyes. We're supposed to look at the sealer as he tells us what we're going to do. They want your focus to be on what the sealer is saying. And so much of what the sealer says, I think, is internalized by that couple. You have a few people in your life in the church that give you counsel that is supposed to be the kind of counsel that dictates your life. So, of course, you've got a bishop who gives counsel, but your mission president's advice is huge. When you listen to your mission president who says, make sure to get married within the first year that you get home.
Yeah.
That's counsel that's going to shape your life.
Yeah.
Your the patriarch's going to give you advice that's going to shape the rest of your life. But I would actually argue that the sealer's advice is potentially the most impactful for young married people.
I didn't listen to it.
Well,
I barely remember what they said, but they said.
So ours was interesting because they actually gave advice to our parents. They said,
stay out.
Parents, stay out of it.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Yeah.
But I sat through a couple of other sealings where I was actually a little disturbed at what was said. There was one that we sat through, and he said, you will have many struggles in your life, but no matter what that adversity is, it will not surpass the challenges of Job.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, and actually that family has had a lot of struggle.
So going back to the 4 agreements, that could be black magic, right?
That's right.
That impacts, because he just said that they're going to have struggles. They might not have. They could, if they had a positive attitude, it could be totally different.
Yeah. What if he had said, you're going to lead a life of prosperity and don't let your wealth get the best of you? Would that have completely changed the direction of their life? Think about that.
You don't know. And so that's a social pressure there too, right?
Unbelievable.
Because now you're thinking throughout your whole life what the sealer said, and it becomes a pressure that you had.
It becomes your reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, those pressures become reality.
Yeah.
Right?
We have this system where we're told that God is the head of all of this, but here are some special people that have the ability to speak for him to you.
Yeah.
I mean, tell me that's not going to affect your reality. So yeah, in terms of social pressure, I guess you could kind of consider that the patriarch, your bishop, your stake president, your mission president, and your sealer, some of the biggest fixtures of social pressure in your life.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, for sure. Sure.
Terrifying.
So that the whole temple experience, you would say you had social pressures, right? From the initiatory to the endowment to the sealing, that we got married where everybody's around. Like there was no choice of getting married outside of the temple. Like that was not an option. Matter of fact, if we did, what would happen if we got married outside the temple?
What would happen?
Yeah.
Just like in terms of like the feeling of disappointment.
Well,
I know my mom would have been fine with it. She was like, "Are you sure you guys don't want to just live together for a little?"
She did. But what I was more talking about, if we got married outside the temple, we'd have to wait a year before we can get sealed again.
Oh, yeah.
So
and that was a big thing in Young Women's too. I remember a story. Some people will remember this because you hear this as a little girl, like in Young Women's, and you're like, open your garments. Yeah. But I was, while you're opening I'll tell this story. There's a story in the handbook for the young women that talks about if you don't marry someone in the temple, you have to wait a whole year to get sealed. If that person dies, too late. You won't see them in the eternities.
That's true.
You know what's funny about that?
True.
Every funeral.
That's a social pressure too. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Well, think about this though.
Yeah.
At every Mormon funeral I've ever been to, whenever some friend or a bishop gives a talk, he says, what do they say? Oh, I know we'll see them again.
Yeah.
Okay. But that poor woman who lost her husband before they were sealed, they're not going to see themselves. They're not going to see each other again.
They won't be, they'll see each other, but they won't be sealed together.
Okay.
Because they'll end up getting remarried.
Drum roll, please.
Should I go this way? Probably should go this way.
I think you should show the handy dandy netting on this side.
Oh,
This is an upgrade. I feel like I bought this for you. Like, oh, honey, these are going to be sexy because you can wear these with you got to hold the other side so you can show the holes. There's like the netting on this side so that they can make them more breathable. So what the church does is they put out lots of
different types. Well, back in the day, there was only like 1 or 2 types of garments that you can.
I was going to mention the questionnaire. So this is the men's one, and it wasn't that fitted before, but what the church is doing is they're taking feedback from the members and saying like, okay, what would be more ideal in your garment? It would make it anyway.
So if you're on our podcast, you're going to have to come to our YouTube to see this because we have the video.
So they put like a meshing on the side apparently to make it more breathable. And
prior to when we went,
they were terrible before.
They were one pieces.
Oh yeah.
You had a one piece and then you had a little poop chute at the
in the back. Yeah.
So they were horrible. Can you imagine? I was regretting wearing those like in high school, and then you succumb to them.
You were regretting wearing them in high school? You mean like you were not looking forward to them
one bit.
Oh,
I'd have to go with wearing. I never wore anything when I went to bed on my chest. I never wear a t-shirt, and I'd have to go into wearing a t-shirt all the time. I wonder,
regarding the church's recent kind of doubling down on garments, it's like the first time that they've ever talked about garments in general conference. They actually mentioned the garment in general conference. And I wonder if there is a concern of the church that so many members have stopped wearing them, and that they're on social media.
Oh,
and
you see it all the time.
creating this like arena where people are not wearing them.
So let's in the 90s when we first got married, Gen Xers, we'll say Gen Xers, right? I don't think garments was ever a choice.
I agree.
Yeah, we were not given a choice.
You didn't not wear garments unless you were like a Jack Mormon.
And here's another social pressure. People would notice that if you're not wearing garments,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Because you can easily see the line. There's this line that comes right across here, and then if it's on your pants,
you can see it down in your down in your pants.
And people, I know people look for those lines, right, to see whether or not like what your status within the church is, and so there is a social pressure just to wear the garment.
There's like these dating stories that like before they hold hands or anything, that the girl would like put her hand on his leg just to feel if he was wearing garments. Like, okay, I know you an RM. But how obedient are you? Do you wear your garments? Because she's looking for someone who's going to be a stalwart father figure. Yeah. Right. So I think that's super interesting.
Well, those are the pressures. Like those are what we talked about.
And I really want to talk about modesty because I spent a lot of time in Young Women's. I was a Beehive advisor. I was a counselor. I think I was involved with a camp director and Young Women's president at one time. And the pressure for the girls to dress modestly, it's definitely something that is all encompassing in the Young Women's organization. So it's not only outlined in the Strength of Youth manual. If the girls came even to girls camp with a tankini on, they had to change their swimsuit. And we had a rash guard that we kept in our supplies. Just like a first aid kit, you would have a rash guard just in case one of the girls wore a bikini to girls camp. And I always kind of thought like, what is it about, like the girls are all together. So is it the fact that we have the men here? Are we keeping their bodies covered because of the priesthood? And now as I look back on it, I realize it is the social pressures. If one girl starts wearing a bikini, then they're all going to want to wear a bikini. And so we would keep this like rash guard. We had 2 rash guards. And I remember at one girls' camp that I was at, one of my amazing counselors was like, I'll pay for it out of pocket because we don't want these poor girls to be like not able to swim if they wear a bikini, because the option of letting them wear a bikini to swim was like not even on the table.
What happened if you had a girl that said, I'm not wearing it? I think I had a friend that was like that. Yeah. I won't use her name, but she would be like, nope, not going to wear it. Not going to wear it. What would happen in that type of situation?
Well, I can say that there was someone in the comments that mentioned that they did that and that the Young Women's leader called their mom and had her picked up from girls' camp. So I don't know what would have happened. It's hard to say in hypotheticals what would happen. Yeah. But in that person's case, she was picked up from girls' camp. So she was treated like she was like a delinquent.
To me, that's an interesting point because I don't think any of my leaders would have done that when I was a kid. Like, I think they would have rather you be there in a bikini than not be there at all. Like, that's the option, right?
Yeah.
So
that's how I was. When I got called as Young Women's president, the counsel that was given to me is that if anyone's ever going to be mad at you, make sure they're mad at you because you're following the handbook and not because you're loosening up on the rules. Mm-hmm. Is that interesting?
So and I know we're approaching an hour and we like to keep this within the hour period of time, but as I had deconstructed my faith, and as I was now no longer believing and open to alcohol, drinking alcohol, I remember walking into Ralph's and looking around. Is there any members? Is there any members around here? Okay, now I can buy alcohol because I'm not seeing any members. Hopefully no one will walk in to see me as I'm buying alcohol. That's a social pressure. Like I am no longer believing at that point in time and still worried about the community I was in and what I was going to buy. And anybody that's a non-Mormon buys alcohol, or the ones that there's no pressure not to buy alcohol
in the real world.
In the real world. But within the church, it's a significant pressure. And I couldn't believe I was still feeling that pressure. And I think we didn't like drink alcohol until probably, well, we had a couple, but we didn't buy
Not
alcohol
much,
like
yeah.
that first year. It was probably into that second year. So I'm like a year removed from the church, and I'm still like having those social pressures impact me.
Feeling like people are going to see you. They're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's like he's the next level now.
Yeah. And I don't even live in Utah, right? So I don't know what the social pressures of this is in Utah, but for our ward, it was just weird. Now it's not a big deal. Like I think it took 2 or 3 years for me to start feeling comfortable to go to Ralph's and buy what I want.
One of the phrases that I've used a lot here is the prescription, that the church kind of writes this prescription, and it comes in the form of the youth manual, but it's what adults are expected to abide by as well. That you really don't watch rated R movies. You don't drink coffee or break the word of wisdom. So coffee or alcohol, you dress modestly. You don't watch pornography or anything that's like R-rated or, has any kind of sex scene. And it's so interesting because, again, going back to this is Jesus's church, those aren't things that Jesus taught. I mean, like the most important things that Jesus taught were like kindness, love, acceptance, not judging other people. But isn't it interesting that within this system, we tend to value that social prescription, that's the Strength of Youth manual, more than what was actually taught by Jesus?
Well, I think modern day revelation trumped anything from the past, I would say.
That is so true. Yeah, because there's always the reference to, if you love me, keep my commandments. And P.S., here's the fine print of the 10 pages of what my commandments are based on the last.
Outside of the Old and New Testament.
And we were even taught that what came out in the ensign
was
commandments.
Yeah.
It was modern day
from the
Revelation. Yeah. Like when that ensign came out with the conference addresses, or if it was an address like the home teaching message in the ensign. Absolutely. That was considered prophecy and commandment. And I don't know what it is now, but I just think it's so interesting. So that's always the big claim. When you leave the church, you're walking away from Jesus. It's like, dude, you're using his name and saying he said all these things that he didn't say.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, the social pressures, what I was surprised is the social pressures still impacted me after I deconstructed during the deconstruction.
Right. And that's because of how much emphasis we have on word of wisdom.
Well, it's
alcohol.
How much indoctrination I had in my head around this stuff and how those social pressures were part of that indoctrination. And I just accepted that. Right.
And we value
fitting in,
adherence to the word of wisdom more than we value accepting people that don't live like us.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the craziness of it, really. Yeah. It's like you said, it's dogma. Yeah.
And it drives a lot of the people's decisions, because I think like in other religions where it's not as dogmatic or high demand, I don't think people feel the social pressures of not going to church, right? Like if I'm a Catholic and I only go Easter and Christmas, do I like have this guilt and shame with me for the whole entire year when I'm not going? I don't. At least the friends that I talk to, they're satisfied with where they're at that point in time. They don't feel like, oh, this Catholic over here is gonna feel this way about me.
It probably depends on the community, right? So I went out to lunch with someone who is part of Church of Christ. And I want to say that's the name of it, right? Church of Christ. Maybe it's Church of Jesus Christ. I think it's the Church of Christ.
Are you talking RLDS?
No, it's not Community of Christ. It's Church of Christ. And it is like... It's really intense.
Oh, I think there's high demand religions outside of Mormonism.
Yeah.
Like I won't call them out, but you could easily tell them
in that community, it's a lot of social pressure is ingrained in that community from what my friend told me. And also we had a friend that was Jehovah's Witness and watched her dating process, and her mom was on all of her dates.
Yeah, I remember
So like we know the social pressures go throughout these different religious experiences, not just our church. And that's why we have a lot of our community here is not just ex-LDS. They're people who are deconstructing from different religions, which we can't really speak to, but it is really interesting hearing other people's experiences in deconstructing from these high demand systems.
And I think it's one of the major levers that the church has that keeps people continuing to go to church or following the Mormon doctrine is those social pressures. How many people do you know that lose their faith and still go to church on a regular, physically in, mentally out? They don't believe in Joseph Smith. They don't believe anything, but they're still going.
There's a lot.
Because of those social pressures, whether their mom and dad will find out about it, or their significant other will find out about it, or they're afraid their kids will find out about it. So they continue to go because of that, because they look at the goodness of it and say, oh, it's just good. And so I'll continue going, but they don't believe anymore. That to me is all social pressure there.
And it's very valid, very valid. I mean, I have family members that continued to go because of me. I was the social pressure. And those are people that I continue to be really close to. And part of my motivation in continuing this like podcast, this whole Faith Unraveled project, which is just a passion project. I mean, it's literally just because I realize, you know, I negatively impacted people with my expectations on them. Like I remember a family member saying to me, would you mind if I ordered coffee at breakfast with the kids? And I didn't know she wasn't believing, but I was just like, no, why would you do that? Why would you don't want to do that in front of my kids?
Yeah. They're afraid that your kids will be, indoctrinated in something different, or
I'm afraid. Yeah. I was afraid of that.
Yeah.
And so I was like, no, I need everybody on board for this, you know, and oh gosh, just looking at that.
If you don't conform, you don't fit in. So that's the reason why the social pressures have a lot of.
Yeah. And that's why I always say, like, I'm not an exmo that's like, everyone needs to leave the church.
Yeah.
But I'm an exmo that's like, everyone needs to heal, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah.
Because for some people, leaving is going to mean losing their social support system. And I recognize that that's not for everybody.
Yeah.
That's a difficult experience.
Like, on my Facebook, you could, if you went back to my Facebook, you could probably tell when I left the church, when I became vocal or more aware, because you would see all these members
dropping off.
Yeah, liking my content prior to a certain period of time, and afterwards, not at all. And I feel like that's a social pressure.
Jared Halverson, did you hear his talk about how you have to be really careful as a member that if you see someone drowning, jumping in to save them? And this example, I guess, was to say like, oh, I found all these materials. Could you come and look at them with me and see if you can help me understand, you know, the problems with the Book of Abraham and polygamy in the church and the way the Book of Mormon was translated versus the way that I was taught that it was translated, and all this racist doctrine and all these problems. Could you come help me look at this and help me? And what Jared Halverson is saying is, if you jump in with them, there's going to be 2 drowning victims. And so it's kind of a way to just dismiss what people are going through. So if they're posting on Facebook, it seems like that's kind of the counsel given now, is just to like not dive into that with them.
Yeah. Well, and the third one I was going to say, the social, and the third one after my faith deconstruction was like joining Facebook groups that could be seen by others. So like Mormon Stories, it took me 7 months to accept your invitation to Mormon Stories, because I didn't want anybody to see that I had accepted that invitation.
Wow.
All the like anti-Mormon stuff, I didn't want to like flag. Did I want to like a pride? I had a friend who does a magazine for gay and lesbian weddings. And I was like, I felt very nervous to like her material prior to my faith deconstruction.
Because that might have been an indication to people that you weren't very faithful.
Exactly.
How sad is that?
Yeah. But you had that feeling too.
Oh,
didn't
absolutely. Yeah. Like you're so conflicted, and anyone who follows an organization with Christ's name on it should not be afraid to love and support and promote equality for everyone.
Yeah.
It's so paradoxical
that
in an organization that has the name Jesus Christ, that we'd be afraid to publicly support LGBTQ, like trans, gay rights, equality, love. Yeah. Like to think of that now, like it lights me up to think about a magazine that's dedicated to LGBTQ weddings. And to think that at one time I would have paused on that or questioned it or. That's really sad.
Well, we all succumb to social pressures around this. Like, you're in a system that if you don't follow that system, you could be potentially on the outside.
Yeah.
And for those who are in, do not want to be on the outside, and they'll do whatever that takes to be on, continue on being on the inside. So that's where you have to also give those, the members grace too, because they're part of a system. They're part of those social pressures. They cannot like step out, or if they do,
see it.
And even if they do see it and they feel it, they still won't like step out because they're too scared of what will happen to them. And so that's where you have to also give grace to the people who are in that system, because they're just operating within that system and they're trying their best to be part of that system, and they just don't know better at times.
I would agree. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really does demonstrate how the social pressures trump actually the teachings of Jesus
Christ.
Like it actually trumps the doctrine. Totally. Yeah. So what I would like to close with is going back to that analogy of that woman who is in that test group and she's looking for the apple. And she's like, I know goddamn well it was not the wrench. It was the apple. And what we experience now going into, like you mentioned, the Mormon Stories group or the Faith Journey meetups group or the TikToks, all the content on YouTube. There's so many great platforms. It's all these people saying, sweetheart, it was the apple. Mm-hmm. It was not the wrench. It was the apple. And you were alone in seeing and knowing that it was the apple, and nobody around you would acknowledge that. They all just kept saying, it's the wrench. It's the wrench. And now you're in a community of people that are saying, it was the apple. We saw it. We know it. We support you.
And it takes a lot of courage to say it's the apple and not everything else. When everybody else is standing up and you're the only one that's sitting down, and you're being watched because you are sitting down, that's a lot of courage to be able to move away from those social pressures, to move away from that community, and now be on the outside of that community. That's super hard.
And what is the church? What does the church want us to do when we walk away from the church? They don't want us telling people it was the apple. Yeah. Well, they want us staying silent about it.
Yeah. Look in the last comment that you. Oh no, it was the post that you did from our last video where someone said you cannot, when you leave, you cannot let it alone.
Right. And exactly on that post, what I wanted to mention was that there was a comment by someone who had left the church, and they said, hey, you think it's 1 year to deconstruct per decade that you were in the church? They said, I left decades ago and I'm still suffering through this. And I'm going to take the position that it is because that person has not had the opportunity to deconstruct. They have not had enough people in their circle that were willing to say, it was the apple. You were right. You were right all along. You have to have that support. It's such an important part of the deconstruction process. Just as the social pressures are a huge part of your indoctrination and you're standing within the group, social support is as important as your deconstructing. You need these groups, you need these people, even if you're just reading, even if you're just watching posts or listening to podcast episodes, you've got to be in a place where you can be validated and that you can actually work through this stuff and heal. So again, I'm not for everybody needs to leave the church. I am just for everyone deserves healing. Everyone deserves to heal. And so with that being said, we really, really hope that this has been a healing series for you so far. We are going to continue with this.
Yeah, this is a great book to take some topics here in this book. We'll do a couple more topics.
Yep.
And
if you haven't gotten your hands on this, we've got a link for it in our comments. And next week, we're going to be talking about another piece from this book. So please join us and let us know what you thought of today's episode. If you're listening on podcast, please give us a review and tell us what you think of the show. And thank you so much for hanging out with us today, you guys. We hope today's episode has been healing. We'll see you next week.